Hello and welcome to a Bechdel Dysfunction, a podcast that dissects feminist films directed by men and discusses whether they are helpful or harmful. I am Cara Strover.
And I am Harry Anderson. We are two film school underachievers who are heaps good at talking about movies but not that flash at making them. We want to acknowledge that we are recording this on Wurundjeri land, and we would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. We also pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. We extend that to any other First Nations people who may be listening today.
Today we'll be discussing the 1991 pulp culture powerhouse Thelma and Louise, directed by Ridley Scott. Amen. Let's haul ass to Mexico and drink margaritas by the pool, mamacita.
Nice.
Are you happy with that?
Yeah, I am. Okay, Thelma and Louise, 1991, directed by Ridley Scott. Two best friends set out on an adventure, but it soon turns around into a terrifying escape from being hunted by the police as the two girls escape for the crimes they committed.
How do you feel about that?
That's a fucking really boring
Yeah,
line.
that's a pretty bad... It's a pretty bad summary.
Yeah, clunky as fuck. But yeah, directed by Ridley Scott.
Written by Callie Curry, starring Susan Sarandon and Geena Davis and some men. Sheena McGavin.
Yeah. Oh, fuck, mate. Loved him in this. Absolutely. I'd forgotten that he was in. I don't really even know what that actor is called. But
Christopher McDonald, I think is his name.
Yeah. Love him.
Yeah.
Love him. As soon as I saw him and when he's swinging his keys around, I was like, well, that's why I'm regional manager and you're not. Kill me. And him falling over, getting into his car at the start. I mean, look.
That was unscripted. He just fell and he kept going. And that's why, Sheena McGavin's a professional. He knows what he's doing and knows who his character is.
God damn it. This is golf.
Yeah. Okay, anyone who doesn't know, because I feel like a lot of people will know of it. It's pretty iconic. Mm-hmm. It's been parodied a bunch of times. People would know the gist.
It's a zeitgeist, yeah.
But everyone who, I think a lot of people haven't seen it. So for anyone who hasn't seen it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know what you're doing here, first of all, but yeah.
Yeah, well, okay. Yeah. So best friends, Louise and Thelma.
Spoiler alert, obviously.
Well, they go on holiday together. And then after some unforeseen and deadly encounter leads to a snowballing crime spree and a run for their lives and freedom.
Yeah.
And then in the end, they choose to drive over a canyon and then get taken alive.
Yes. Well, there's a lot to pick apart there.
A lot to pick apart. We'll say now, I think, maybe, that for anyone who doesn't know, what we're going to call the inciting incident in this film is a hard-to-watch sexual assault attempt, which then results in that person being murdered. Trigger warning basically for sexual assault for this episode. If that's something makes you uncomfortable or you have... Well, obviously makes everyone uncomfortable, but just be aware of that we are going to be talking about it.
Yeah. And also worth noting, just as a bit of a trigger warning, less severe, but also I guess that is the end of the film. Again, spoilers alert if you haven't seen this movie. I don't know why you're here, but it does deal with suicide as well in the end. So covering off all of that, we'll refer to the suicide as the ending, and we will refer to the attempted sexual assault as the inciting incident. Just because we don't really want to keep saying it over and over again.
No.
So that's just a little bit easier. That's where we're at. Was this the first time you'd watched it?
No.
Or had you seen it before? When was the first time you watched this movie?
A couple of years ago. I don't really remember. I think it was around 2019, 2020. I just was like, yeah, I've heard so much about this. I'll give it a try. And it was a good time. I was like, yeah, this is everything I wanted it to be from what I already knew about it from the Simpsons episode.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the first time I sort of came into awareness of it was the famous Simpsons episode with Marge and the character I cannot remember.
It doesn't matter. She doesn't show
Ruth, yeah. That was the same for me. I mean, I only saw it, I reckon, maybe 4 or 5 years ago for the first time. I was aware of it. I think I had it in my mind that it was always Brad Pitt's first big feature role. I'm sure he'd been in other feature films before that.
It's his breakout for sure.
Yeah.
But I actually didn't. I think when I first watched it, I didn't know that he was in it.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Not necessarily, a definitive role.
He's 28.
Yeah, really? Wow.
He's not.
He's looking lean.
Yeah.
He's looking sharp. He's looking smoking. But Honestly, that's all that I would really want to mention about him, to be honest, because it's not his movie.
No.
It's not anything about him. But that was what I did know about the film to begin with. I knew about the ending, not about the inciting incident. And to be honest, until watching this again for the second time, which I watched yesterday, I'd completely forgotten how violent and full-on the inciting incident was. And it is the point of much contention.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a bit how it's represented in pop culture is like a sort of crime road buddy movie, as if they just kind of like in the legacy of like maybe like a gunslinger kind of thing. And in that context, you wouldn't really think about the inciting incident that much. No, it's pretty. I had also forgotten how intense it was when we were rewatching it, and and I think also I've just kind of matured a bit in my film watching experience. I don't think the first time I watched it, it had as much of an impact on me. And this time, I've kind of matured just as a person and as a viewer. And I was like, this is pretty...
It's difficult viewing.
Yeah, it's probably the most... a lot of this movie feels very heightened as well. Mm-hmm. This feels quite real and quite grounded. And it's not... Yeah, it's not hyper real, I don't think, in any sense. It feels like something that definitely happened in a few parking lots across the entire world forever, and unfortunately still.
Yeah. I just find this in general, just with stuff with sexual violence or violence at all, the older I get, the more difficult it is to watch it. And I think that's, in a way, I hope that's the same for everyone. I hope that everyone sort of just realises the human toll of this sort of stuff in everyone's lives and how full on it is. But I guess in relation to the film and the way that we're sort of analysing it and the way that it's been remembered in the cultural zeitgeist is that does not come up a lot. I think when you think of Thelma and Louise, there is the imagery of the car going off the cliff, which is on the cover of the Feminist Film Guide, which we have in front of us right now. But
the other iconic image is probably like the Polaroid selfie at the start.
Yeah.
How does it get from A to B? Yeah. Complicated journey.
Yeah, well, but even just like screaming in cars, like I think that's the moment that a lot of women have sort of hung on to in terms of just like a surface level joy taking out of this film. It's just like girls are on the road. Yeah. We're having a fucking great time. We're off on an adventure. But I guess that is the postcard image that's burnt into everyone's mind, apart from the ending or the Polaroid itself. But I guess, the harshness of it all perhaps doesn't get talked about as much.
I feel like the people who mostly talk about the inciting incident tend to be male reviewers who have a problem with how men are presented in the film.
Yeah.
Because what they rightly point out is that after a man attacks Thelma in the parking lot, after a night of drinking and dancing, he's stopped by Louise, puts a gun to his throat, and he backs off. And they are sort of able to walk away. And then he taunts Louise and calls her a bitch. And then she shoots him.
Yeah.
And there's then that discussion of like, well, it's not self-defense because you were already away. Mm-hmm. It's retaliation. To me, it reads like a trauma response to 100%. What's happened.
And we do find that out later on.
Especially like with Louise's sort of hinted at backstory. And then what's immediately just happened to Thelma. To me, the rest of their actions actually do make sense as just a sort of immediate like panic response to what's happened.
Yeah. There are elements to the plot that people might go, oh, that was a stupid decision. Why did they do this? Why did they do that? And we can pick that apart until the cows come home. But honestly, I'm firmly of the belief that every single thing that happens in the plot is of greater service to the overall story and themes.
Okay, I disagree.
Well, I'm happy.
We'll get to that.
I'm happy to start picking apart with that. But I think, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm happy to talk about this in greater detail as we further get down the track, we'll just put these little seeds in and we'll let them grow later on. But yeah, I think it's very serviceable to the story and what the creators of the film were trying to get across. But how about we spend a little bit of time talking about the leading ladies in this? No, Susan Sarandon and Geena Davis. How did you find their performances?
Great. Like,
cool. That'll be the end of the podcast. Great work. Nice one. Nice.
I think Yeah, I don't really know even like what else to say about it. It's probably the thing that carries the film the most is their performances and their characterization. I think they're both. I think that Geena Davis has a pretty tough job. I think because, like a lot of reviewers pointed out, she makes the most dumb decision, and I am doing air quotes as I say that. Like I said, she's had having a trauma response, so I don't like to characterize it that way. But she is the one who kind of keeps fucking it up for Louise, who just wanted to go fishing. But she still makes it charming, like makes it believable as this woman who's had this like really boring life where she's really ground down by this horrible man she's been with since she was 14 years old.
Yeah.
And just kind of, you can kind of tell from her energy, like just how much she's just like restless energy, just bursting at the seams to just have any different experience to what she's had up to this point. And how she kind of just fully embraces that. And you're like, well, I'm a criminal now, and I think I might be great at it.
Yeah. In context to Geena Davis's performance of Thelma, it is a little bit of a Breaking Bad moment. Within, a lighthearted context, or tone and style of the film, rather, in stark contrast to the series Breaking Bad, she's had to be pushed to the brink and, sort of looked death in the eye to feel alive. And now that she can feel alive, she's kind of found herself or has found a freedom in it all. And we see that when she goes from just like a mild-mannered just housewife in a dressing gown, constantly putting the chocolate bar in and out of the fridge in that opening scene with Shooter McGavin, which I fucking love. I love it so much. To this, like sunglasses wearing, convertible riding, very strange Confederate flag skull t-shirt, which we can touch on a little bit later on, but take it with a pinch of salt.
But also I think there's also kind of arrested development to her as well. Like that she calls her husband infantile, which he is, but she also isn't aware. I think that they're kind of in a bit of sympathy to Shooter McGavin. They're kind of stunting each other's growth. Like, because she kind of still has this very, and because of his kind of paternalistic relationship as the husband of like knowledge, so she kind of still has this almost teenagery attitude of like needing permission and needing guidance. And then once she does, start doing things on her own, she fully embraces that. And also I think her refusal to go back. There are opportunities for her to, she didn't kill that guy. Like she could have not, but once she kind of has that awakening, it's not worth going back for her.
Yeah, she is super naive. And I think that is very deliberate and it's a very important element because we need to develop empathy for her. And I think that's probably one of Ridley Scott's greatest strengths in the beginning of this film is that he develops empathy for these two women straight out of the gate and you fall in love with them so quickly. Like, that scene, the opening scene where you see Geena Davis for the first time with Shooter McGavin, your heart breaks for her. Fucking horrible. Like this absolute dick of a husband who's treating her like shit. She's made him coffee. She's just trying to be lovely, just wants permission, which is fucking ridiculous in the first place. Just go away with her friend for a weekend.
To not be afraid to ask him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And when they first, chat for the first time and they're loading up the car, they're back and forth, they're banter, like,
even them on the phone. I actually find even them on the phone because the contrast, I think it sets up the contrast between them really well because they are best friends and super close, but so different. Yeah. And you can, and like this comes out more as the story goes, but you can kind of tell Susan Sarandon's much more, I think a little bit older. A little bit more worldly. World weary, cautious.
Does not like Texas.
Doesn't trust people and is proven right to almost every time. But still has like so much love for Thelma and just I think wants to protect her. Yeah. Has that kind of nurturing protective thing, which I think a lot of women can relate to. Like if you have like women like to protect their friends. Like when we can kind of see a situation going maybe one way that we think and maybe the girl we're with isn't kind of picking up on it, we like to step in.
Nightclub, bathroom, energies, which we get in this.
I love that. I love that scene in the bar bathroom. I love it. Like I don't even think anyone even says anything, but like that, I just adored it. It felt so true. Even though I would never be in a bar like that, I would be in many bathrooms like that.
I love Geena Davis for her ability to just be such a believable dork.
Yeah.
Like her and I think Julia Roberts both have this knack for just like being able to be goofy and honest and very uncool, and it just comes across as so believable.
Yeah.
And empathy inducing. Like,
yeah, she really, like, even despite the fact that she's like, I don't know, like 6'5" and just like stunningly beautiful and just has like this amazing face and body and everything, she still kind of comes across as, she makes it work as an Arkansas housewife who's never been allowed to like have fun. I think when she signed on to the project, they were having so much trouble casting Louise that she signed a contract saying she'd play Louise if they couldn't get anyone else to play her.
Yeah.
And she could have done it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Even though I think Susan Sarandon is more perfect as Louise. I think they're in the right roles. I
agree. I heard that Geena Davis initially was trying for about a year to play the role of Louise, and then once she sort of got in a room with Ridley Scott, went on like a 2-hour tirade explaining why she would play Louise, and then convinced herself while she was saying this stuff out loud that she wasn't right for it. And then Ridley Scott offered, would you be interested in playing Thelma? And then went on another 2-hour tirade convincing herself that she was right for that. And I think there's multiple interviews I've just been watching over the last couple of days when Geena Davis finally started working with Susan Sarandon. She was like, of course Susan was going to be Louise. I'm such an idiot. Which I really love. And you can feel their chemistry. And it's a great casting choice. Like, just from researching the past couple of days, I know that the original duo they were planning to have in this were Michelle Pfeiffer and Jodie Foster. How do you think that would have gone?
Interesting. Jodie, which as who?
Well,
see, in my head, it's Jodie Foster is Louise.
Same.
And Michelle Pfeiffer is Thelma.
Yeah.
That could have been good.
Yeah.
It's just weird.
I'm glad we got what we got because I can't really see anyone else doing it when it's all said and done. But if, we got that, I'm sure it would be good.
Hey, you're not going to get subpar with Michelle and Jodie.
Michelle Pfeiffer. Funny.
But I think Jodie was busy making Silence of the Lambs that year.
Let's start with the male director, the premise of the podcast, Ridley Scott. What are your feelings on Ridley Scott and his filmography?
I don't really have a strong Ridley Scott opinion. I think the first movie I saw of his was Blade Runner, and I didn't really like it. I think I've had to watch it like 3 times for school.
Always kills a movie.
Yeah. And also which version you're watching. I think Blade Runner is kind of a bit difficult because it's which version are you watching and which ending do you have and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But actually, I like Blade Runner now. I like Alien. Sorry, I'm just looking at this Wikipedia what movies have I seen? I like Alien. Aside, I think it's interesting because he did make, obviously this, which is a kind of iconic feminist film, and also Alien as well has that reputation. We won't talk too much about Alien because I think we'll probably talk about Alien one day.
Yeah, definitely.
He's not someone who kind of exists in my consciousness as like a particularly political filmmaker or a particularly feminist one. Not in a negative way. It's just that's not really how.
It's not how you would identify him per se, because he's quite a ubiquitous filmmaker. If you look at his filmography.
He's maybe an anti-auteur. Would we put him in that category?
I wouldn't say that he has a definitive visual style, especially when you sort of compare him to his brother.
And not even like thematically, I would say. I think I think he has a pretty varied approach.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I had a really nice quote. Let me find it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so this is from a review from the New Yorker, 1991, by a gentleman called Terence Rafferty. I liked this review because it didn't really talk too much about. I think it was a bit before the sort of backlash kind of started, so it was just kind of about the film.
Yep.
And he's talking about Ridley Scott, and what does he say? His images have a true believer's intensity, and if they're not always persuasive, it's perhaps because Scott isn't terribly selective about what he believes in, which feels like a bit of a dig. But I actually don't mind it for a director who's approaching so many different kinds of work. He can just kind of go with what the work is doing. Like, what is this film about? What is the script about? And I'm kind of going to jump on board with that rather than didactically infuse it into everything that he does, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And look, to be honest, like before I started looking into him about this, like I knew that he had made films that had almost backhandedly perhaps become feminist icon films. Like, I wouldn't necessarily say that Alien is overtly feminist, but it does have a female leading character who subverts expectation. And we will cover that on the podcast, regardless of what I just said, because it's more about the impact rather than the intention. Perhaps with this, however, just from a bit of the research that I've done, it seems that this came across his desk and piqued his interest. He initially didn't want to direct it. He took it in with his production company and sort of shipped it around to other directors and got the response that a lot of male film reviewers have given this, that we will be angry about later on when we talk about them. And I've just seen a few visual interviews with him in the past couple of days where talked appropriately negatively about these people, these male directors who he didn't name, but ultimately saying like, well, your problem with this being about women is your problem with women, which I thought was particularly strong.
Yeah.
In reference to the text, Ridley Scott's relationship with Geena Davis and Susan Sarandon, who were both heavily involved in the writing process. He would often change scenes upon their suggestion, which is not all that common.
No, I don't think I've looked into the background as much as you have. The one I read about, which I just thought was like probably the peak of it for me, is I think originally Louise and Jimmy are supposed to have sex in the motel, and Susan Sarandon was like, I don't think Louise would want to have sex at that time. She's just had a pretty traumatic, and Thelma's doing her thing, but Thelma's like sort of learning about herself for the first time, whereas Louise is over here, has just killed someone and is also reliving, bringing up trauma from her own past. And also like Jimmy's quite violent in that scene, like not physically, but to me, the behavior of the Michael Madsen character is extremely coercive and like abusive in itself.
Yeah, very.
So for her to then like have sex with him, like it might be, I don't know, a nice tender parallel to whatever Geena Davis is doing, but it doesn't speak true to like Louise's character, and it doesn't suit, I think, the themes of the movie. And he followed her advice and they changed it. And I'm like, good job.
Well, exactly. And I don't think there'd be that many male directors who would be open to hearing and accepting that and then let that have a definitive impact on the rest of the film. In the inciting incident, the initial direction was for Louise to sort of have a stance as a police officer, sort of like really macho constructed, like making it really deliberate. And Susan Sarandon's response was like, this is a cold rush of blood to the head. This is reactive. This is coming out of trauma. I think it's got to be a bit more ugly. It's got to be a bit more wobbly. And that's what we see in that scene. That scene is nothing but panic from someone's honest response.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you get that from someone who doesn't have a connection and a belief that that is the right thing to do.
Yeah, someone who's not. And I can totally see also somebody who's approaching this from like a feminist perspective being like, no, that's kind of what you want, is you want Louise to go in there with a power pose. But like you say, that's not true to the reality of what's happening.
Yeah.
So.
And ultimately not true to that scene, beat for beat, and a moment, and not true to the themes of what the story is trying to discuss.
Okay, I think, but my problems with the script are sort of more story and like plot wise. It's not thematic. I think, okay, the big one is the truck driver.
Great, because I actually really did want to talk to you about this. Yeah.
I just cut it. It's so stupid. Like, this is where the thing about Thelma Louise being stupid is kind of true, because you're fleeing to Mexico and you drive past. Why do you drive past the same trucker 3 times? How is that happening when you're both like, where is this truck going? And he harasses them. He's gross. I get it. He's gross. But why are you taking time out of fleeing to south of the border? When you know you're being chased by the police, like they've already had contact with the fucking FBI to pull over and shoot up his truck to teach him a lesson about not harassing women. I think that scene is stupid. It doesn't make sense. It makes them look stupid. And because of that, then it becomes about why it's there. And the reason it's there is to be like, don't harass women, don't be a pig. And then that becomes didactic and boring and overbearing and annoying, and people come away from it being like, that was stupid. So I think
bit of a Fight Club moment.
A little bit, yeah. Like, whereas I think if you take that out, everything else kind of does, but everything else kind of does work. Like, the other sort of incidents make sense. I think Thelma wanting to take Brad Pitt with him and Louise kind of indulging her in that, I think that makes sense. Him managing to rob them, even though he tells them, like, I think Thelma kind of falling for his charm, and because, like we talked about, she's a bit naive, less experienced in the world. If she had just kept the money with her, we wouldn't have this problem, but etc. Like, I think that all makes sense. And then they don't have money, and he's already taught her how to rob a store. So this kind of crime spree stuff makes sense. And then they get pulled over, and they know if they run the plates, he's going to know who they are. So they have to put the cop in the trunk, which I love that scene as well. All of this is very believable to the characters and has a good cause and effect sequence. The escalation in crime makes sense. The truck driver stuff doesn't.
Yes. It tonally, it is incredibly bizarre. Even the performance of the trucker, it's
the
off.
Worst.
It's really off, yeah.
Geena Davis does look really hot in that scene. So you're like, well, maybe.
My question to you is, how did you find that as sort of a feminist fantasy dialed up to 11? Like, have you ever had shower thoughts with, someone who's treated you like shit in the same way that this trucker's kind of done? Like, what you might do if you got them alone and I can finally sort of clench my fist. Was it appealing in that capacity at all? It's okay if it wasn't. I was just curious. That's just something that popped into my mind when I was seeing. It's this isn't for me. I think the tone is off and it's a bit strange, but I can see why it would be here. And maybe some women watching this might be like, fuck, that was satisfying.
Yeah, it wasn't for me because I just had all these problems with it.
Yeah.
I guess I can see it from that perspective, but I think ultimately it's the worst part of the film and just kind of gives air to these annoying criticisms.
Yeah.
But again, like I said before, they don't do anything. Well, I mean, they blow up his truck. But they don't hurt him. Do you know what I mean? They don't hurt the cop. Nobody in the robbery gets hurt.
Yeah.
When they say escalation in crime, it's actually a de-escalation because the first thing that happens is they shoot a guy, and then after that,
it's just an escalation possibly in volume.
Yeah. So I get what you're saying, but I don't think it. And
you can do without it.
I don't know. I think also I think women can see through it. You kind of just know that that's what this is for, and it's I think you have that moment, if anything, with when Louise shoots that guy, and which is much more powerful, and because you can talk about being self-defense or anything, to me it's justified, and to me it's catharsis.
Yeah, I agree.
There's a huge amount of relief to me in that moment when she does that, because it's well, everything about him, it's he's done this before, he'll do it again.
Yeah,
just world's a better place without him.
And we have established empathy for the characters already, whom we're just in love with. So that they can do no wrong for mine at any point. But the tanker scene is just bizarre. I think it's tonally off. You probably get that satisfaction of them being badasses putting the cop in the trunk.
Yeah.
And they still sort of, I don't want to say maintain integrity is the wrong thing to say, because I feel like they maintain integrity throughout, but it is just tonally off. But hey, if you enjoy it, good for you.
Yeah, if you have fun, I kind of get enjoying it as its own thing. I think if I saw it as a YouTube clip, I'd be like, that was fun. And like I say, I think they both look pretty hot during that bit. They're at their sort of most butch lesbian aesthetic.
Yeah.
The weird sort of Confederate top I hadn't actually noticed, but yeah. I as part of the film, I think it weakens the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I think is weak is the Harvey Keitel character.
Great.
I just find the character kind of bizarre. I don't understand Harvey Keitel, who plays like an Arkansas detective who's first on the scene at the murder, he manages to sort of understand everything about what happened in that car park and Louise's story, you know, from 1,000 miles away. Like, I don't understand how he comes to that position of sympathy with them. And it's sort of, and I almost find it kind of it's almost found it patronizing as a viewer of like, you feel sympathy and you understand what's going on with Thelma and Louise, and he understands it because he's on our side. And I'm like, well, why does he? He's not, you know, I think it could have been done better. It just doesn't make sense.
No, it's a little bit half-baked for mine. And I'm glad you said that, because I think maybe it is a sign of the time, and as we sort of push into a little bit, you know, it's like, has it aged well, hasn't it aged well? I think that's probably one of the defining factors, where it's like in 1991, Harvey Keitel's character, and I think he does a perfect job at playing it. I think his performance is solid.
I actually like a lot of his moments, like him interacting with the husband and stuff, and Stephen Tobolowsky, who we love and everything. I don't think he does a bad performance. I just don't really understand his motivations. It doesn't make sense to me that he's so sympathetic to them.
It does a little bit for me. I get it. It's like he's sort of just like, he's the small town detective who knows the only sort of half witness to this when he's talking to the bartender.
I liked that. I liked a lot of the moments.
Well, you see him being human, and I think that's what it is. Like, he reads it for what it is, and he takes her word for it, which says a lot. Like, it's almost like, my point in all of this is that, like, the bar was very fucking low in 1991. And if it was made today, his character is probably a bit more assertive and straight out of the gate, and doesn't show... You don't get those scenes where he's going over to fucking Shooter McGavin's house and he's been like, trying to manipulate him to, like, get stuff, you know, out of Geena Davis. Like, that shit shows how wonky it is, but also how low the bar is. And I think, like, I get it. He's a grassroots detective who just wants the best. He's probably seen this stuff before. He may have a daughter of his own. He may have a wife of his own, have some sort of sympathy to women in general. But yeah, I get what you're saying. He's real airy-fairy, like.
I guess you could, and I get, then the problem then is then you'd have to be trying to sort of establish like a bit of a backstory for him, and then that's kind of spending too much time with him for this movie that isn't about him.
Yeah, exactly. But you should be getting shit, like, it should be airtight that he is an ally, you know what I mean? Like, instead of like when they're running in the rain, getting to Daryl's house, and like all the FBI agents are just like running to get there in the rain. It's just like, why are you fucking having fun? Like, you should be like, at that point, he should be going to that house just as like, because it's his job, but he should feel a certain level of unease about it, because he knows that like these women are being hard done by.
Yeah, and even if he, like, you know, as you said, he has a familiarity with, like, just talking about it in the universe of the movie where there are good cops and then the FBI or whatever. Like, he didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
We can talk about also Jimmy for a bit.
Oh, please, because I think Michael Madsen is great casting for that, and I do love his role, and I think he sort of falls into that same category of the bar being very fucking low.
Very low, because I read a lot of articles countering the backlash, and there was a bit of a backlash. It was real. I was sort of like, is this backlash real? It was. Yeah. With a huge criticism is about, this is a man-hating movie. All the men in this movie are awful. And then the response is often, but the Harvey Keitel character. And I've already said what I feel about that. And the other response is, Jimmy, the soft-spoken musician. And, you know, this movie's from 1991. Our understandings of the dynamics of abusive relationships and even just the dynamics of men and women has like evolved so much. So I'm looking at it from a 2023 perspective, but to me, that is an abusive relationship. Mm-hmm. When he starts throwing the furniture around and she's like, if you're going to do this, so this is a repeated pattern of behavior, that's domestic abuse. The fact that he doesn't hit you, if he starts throwing furniture around and hitting the wall, that's coercive behavior. Yeah. Not a good guy, not a good look. And also, he says to her, I'm not going to tell anyone that I saw you. I'm not going to tell anyone about this. He tells Harvey Keitel. He's not sympathetic to me. He's not a
No, he rats her out.
He rats her out, like, instantly. Yeah. We don't even get to see. It's so inconsequential, him ratting her out, that we don't even see it.
I think he is a fantastic character. and it's so much to dig into. I like Michael Madsen as the casting. I think it's great. He does have that sort of like super quiet, could explode at any moment nature about him, and he's like a great like Southern State slimeball. Like if you need him, like whether it's Kill Bill, whether it's
but it's also in the first kind of scenes.
He's very emotionally manipulative as well.
Yeah.
Like he only comes down there because he thought that she's run away, sort of thing, and he's like hasn't been returning her calls. He's gone AWOL. Like he is the insecure man who's writing the negative reviews about this film. Like he is the perfect encapsulation of that person.
But it's so interesting because even when in the rewatch, I'd sort of forgotten that he was in it, and I was like, oh, Michael Madsen's here. And I was sort of like, oh, they're setting him up as kind of this bad boyfriend, but he's kind of being sensitive. So maybe he's
love the tenderness.
So maybe he's just got like a bit of a bad veneer, but like deep down there's this like, like you say, tenderness and like deep connection between them. And that's what I thought it was going to be when they have that phone conversation. But then once it's in the hotel, it's like, oh no, he's a piece of shit. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, okay, we're playing this straight. Also fine. Yeah. Also happy with that. But then to turn around as a critic and be like, see, another good man in the movie.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And for me, I don't mind, like, I don't want this to happen in real life, obviously, but I don't mind him being patchy. Like, I kind of like that he's insecure and he can't handle his emotions, and like he's trying to propose to her, but he's like throwing shit across the room. Like, I like when these characters exist and they're being shown for being flawed. Like, I like that a lot. Those two like parallel hotel room scenes are so amazing. They're just great displays of different levels of yearning and what people just wanting, like what's deep in their heart so much shown like at parallel opposites. I love the weariness on his face. I love how he gets brought down by Sarandon. Like she completely takes power in that situation and dominates that room pretty much.
But she's also extremely defensive, and she's also in a protective stance. Like when she's in the like near the door, which is like red flag of like how this relationship has gone to me. Yeah.
Oh, it's monstrous. Don't get me wrong. It is monstrous.
No, but I get what you're saying. But it's just like I said, I think that maybe even Ridley Scott, and even as we've talked about it, and even Sarandon and Geena Davis, like I think possibly if they were doing this in a 2023 context, I don't know how they're trying to portray Jimmy. I don't know if they're going for more slime bag or like sensitive guy.
I suspect that they probably were going for more sensitive guy, but it's just it's aged this way because the bar is so low.
And because like I said, our understandings and perspectives have changed. So I wonder if they were making this now, if they would change his characterization basically to
I would be fine if they kept him how he was, but just didn't hold him up as like the quiet guy.
But that's where I'm not even sure about it, because I don't even know, like what I'm saying is based on reviews of saying he's the good guy. The film's kind of ambiguous about how good or bad he is.
Yeah, because he kind of just disappears after the wrapping out.
And it's actually, honestly, it's kind of true for most of them. It's kind of ambiguous about, like, I mean, Daryl's a pig, but he's not like, you know, the worst person who ever lived. Like, he's... Yeah. And he also just kind of disappears. And Brad Pitt, just once they do their bit, then they just kind of go.
All same as Legally Blonde. The men in this film are plot devices, really. And I'm fine with that. I think the moments that they all give are worth so much, whether it be comedic, where Daryl's standing in his own pizza.
My God.
Great shit. But look. And I think that comes back to the negative criticisms.
But I even wanted to, because we were talking about this article that I sent you from like the 2016.
This fucking genius who wrote for the New York Post.
Little thing that I kind of want to read. He wrote this article, and it's obviously just this kind of nostalgia critic, like internet baity. I'm going to be negative about the iconic thing. It's just trolling, basically. So I don't want to give it too much air. But I do think there's an interesting lesson in just completely missing the point and being insanely smug about it. So this is a bit long, but just bear with me. So this is a quote from his article called "As a Feminist Film, Thelma Louise Fails Miserably" from 2016. Carl Smith, by the way.
Great year. Everything went so well that year.
Great. It's as if Curry is trying to paint feminists as given to hysterical overreaction. Teachable, and I'm going to asterisk teachable, moments get garbled. Just days after learning that being alone with a strange man is not a great idea, Thelma picks up a hitchhiker who turns out to be a criminal simply because he's Brad Pitt, suggesting the lesson for women is be careful of men you don't know except the cute ones. The lesson is not be careful of men you don't know. The lesson is we live in a society where men think that they can do what they want to women.
Yeah.
That's the lesson. To even frame this as Thelma should have learned not to trust men it's victim blaming.
Yeah, it's a real well, did you see what she was wearing kind of attitude?
It's a victim blaming from a viewer. It's the victim blaming that Susan Sarandon says will happen. He also goes on about how it's stupid that she doesn't want to drive through Texas. And it's like, and he talks about how it's like, what, these women can't read a map. They don't know they need to go through Texas. And it's like, she says in the film why she doesn't want to go through Texas. That's just bad media literacy. Like, she says why.
Also, it's just again, I think it's a really shallow opinion to start picking apart a plot when you've led an article about trying to criticize the themes, where it's just it doesn't actually matter where they're driving. It has nothing to do. They could be driving to the moon as long as it is indicative of their journey in terms of the themes of the story. It's fine. It doesn't matter where they're going.
Director Ridley Scott must think women don't know how to read a map. And I'm sorry, that is just bad.
So shallow.
It's just bad media literacy. It's like, did you watch the movie? Because Susan Sarandon says, I'm not going to drive through Texas, find another route. And you can think that that's stupid, but there's a reasoning behind it. She obviously has a trauma in Texas, or she has she possibly even has a criminal history in Texas, and she doesn't want to bring that into this escape from the law. Again, sorry, we are feeding too much air into this troll from 2016, so we will stop talking about him now. But
I just want to touch on the hotel room scenes briefly.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go.
Because, I love that depiction of yearning of two people who Geena Davis just wants nothing but escapism, and she gets it with the amazingly chiseled torso of Brad Pitt. Well done to his personal trainer.
Well done, Thelma.
Yeah.
To go.
It looks like a tight fuck, man. She's having a great time. She just wants that sense of adventure that has been held back from her for so long.
I love the scene actually after in the next morning in the diner when she comes and she's so excited.
Yeah,
she's got this hickey,
I do too.
And she's like, I finally get what the fuss is about. I love that.
Yeah, same.
And
I'm not even fucking bothered that she, there's a plot hole that, she shouldn't have left this criminal alone with the money, because the money isn't important for mine. That plot element is not fucking important.
Like I say, I think it's kind of part of her character. He was kind of just sucked in with the romanticism of it all.
Yeah.
And again, in the wake of an extremely traumatic experience, he left the money. Yeah. And then that leads into the next bit. But that's why I don't mind that, because, A, he stole the money, and B, he taught her how to rob a grocery store. So then we have the next bit.
Yeah.
So, again, I don't think it's a plot hole. I think it's part of the character.
Exactly. It is serviceable to the story. And in the same way that, the parallel scene with Susan Sarandon and Michael Madsen, I guess Louise's yearning just to have some stability in her life, the want for him to just be there and be her man and be her rock, which you believe it all up until the moment where he sort of rats her out, which is just so tragically heartbreaking. We want the best for these two characters, and you sort of think that it's going to happen with these two scenes. And I remember writing this down when I was watching it. It's just I do not care that the plot is not moving along at this point. I am so happy just to be there with all of them and going through it all. And it does not bother me that they're not trying to get to Mexico at that point. They're just they stop, they have this time together. You have the constant momentum of it being on the road. But again, Mexico is a MacGuffin. It does not matter. It's not important, because the important thing is them being alive. And you have these moments of them being alive. And
even if you take the kind of crime as a metaphor for women's liberation, it's they're stepping outside the female role. They've let go. And I think there's a few moments that really reinforce that. It's kind of a weird scene, but that bit where you see Susan Sarandon is constantly throwing away the trappings of being a woman. Like, she goes to put her lipstick on and she throws it away. She trades her jewelry for a hat. Like,
and like you say, that slowly gets broken down, and it says so much about her growth that, like, she doesn't have to be part of what society wants her to be anymore.
Well, it's almost like she can't. It's like, well, I've committed this crime. I'm now living outside the law. I'm living outside the norms of society. I may as well also, I'm living outside the norms of a law-abiding citizen. I may as well also live outside the norms of a woman.
Yeah.
I'll just be myself, which is quite radical. And I think it's more prominent with Thelma, who, like, if you take the scene where they're packing, they kind of have these two contrasting but hyper feminine like presentations, right? Because Louise is super organized. Like, she's putting her shoes in little plastic bags and she knows exactly what she's taking.
The packing montage is great.
And
it's
like,
such a good vibe.
Yeah, and they're highly contrasting, but they're both hyper feminine. And like, Louise is like making herself all neat and presentable. And Thelma is just taking everything because she's like, well, I don't know, it could be anything and I want to like look good for any occasion or whatever. And she comes out in this stunning like white dress, like, and her hair like fully curled and coiffed and with the rollers in. I loved that. And like fully made up and everything. And slowly, and we see that throughout the movie, like the scene at the motel where she's in this kind of like high cut bikini and stuff. And it's slowly she kind of loses hyper feminine like choices and just, you know, goes with what she's got. Like I say in this, you know, they keep driving with the top down and they keep getting increasingly like sunburnt and their hair just keeps getting wind blown.
Yeah.
And they care about it less and less. Like at the start, I think Louise is it Louise wearing the scarf?
Yeah.
And they care about it less and less because it's, and that's kind of, that's where the parallel is. It's like, well, I'm a criminal. I can't go back to being a normal person. Why am I going to keep on trying to like be a woman?
Mm-hmm. Air quotation marks.
Air quotation marks for be a woman, because we all know gender is a performance. And yeah, so I totally agree. It was a bit rambly, but like I get what you're saying. Louise's conviction after she's shot this man and they're driving away, and she just says, "I can't go to the police because they're not going to believe what we say."
Yeah,
like. Aside from even whether it's like she could claim self-defense, like they could say like, oh, he was lunging at us and whatever and I had to shoot him. They're not going to be believed. They're not going to be believed because when she says to Thelma, heaps of people saw you in that bar drinking and dancing with him all night. Nobody is going to believe that he needed to rape you because obviously you wanted to fuck him. And it's like, that is still true to this day.
Yeah.
So in terms of and it's like, that's not really about the movie aging well. That's just about society still being crap.
Yeah.
But I still found it like really prescient with a lot of what it had to say. And even about its conversations about abusive relationships. You know, we've got a whole fucking trad wife movement on the internet of women being like, no, I want to be a housewife. And it's like, read the Feminine Mystique or something.
Yeah.
Like and particularly in the US now, we're having a complete rollback on like Roe v. Wade, which is going to be a rollback on contraception. And I think they're also trying to roll back no fault divorce. So we're actually kind of in a regressive time. Like we don't believe victims. That's kind of what it comes down to. Is at the end of the day, there's always this little bit of doubt in so many people's minds of like, well, maybe she did want to have, maybe she's lying, maybe he's being hard done by. And that's kind of a huge part of what Thelma Louise is about.
I would like to lead us into our second last segment, which is Sexy Lamp.
Oh, here's the Sexy Lamp?
Yes, I would say Road Bike Ruster is my Sexy Lamp, just because. And again, it's probably a strength to the feminist nature of the film is that, because usually, as we explained in last week's episode, the criteria of sexy lamp is like, if you could replace a female character with a sexy lamp in your movie, you're a fucking hack. You can't really do that with any of the female characters in this film.
No.
So Again, it's a strength.
You can't do it with most of the male ones either. I
reckon you could do it.
You could do it with Rustamir
because it's not important.
You could cut that whole thing. I don't know why it's there.
I think that's also like this is the same measuring stick. If you can cut it out,
if you can cut
it's
it,
a sexy lamp. It's funny, but it's completely out of place. It's kind of just like. And it directly follows the tanker scene as well.
Yeah.
So the pacing gets real kooky.
Yeah, it's weird.
Anyway, he's my sexy lamp.
Okay.
Nothing wrong with the performance. If that scene was just like a video on YouTube, like you said, about the tanker scene, I'm sure it'd be funny and fine. Even though it has no structure. But yeah, he's my sexy lamp. Do you have a sexy lamp?
I didn't have one. I guess I'd agree with you. I hadn't thought of... I hadn't thought of one.
Yeah.
Because all of the...
Maybe one of the FBI agents could be one. Do you think one of those? Maybe one of those?
I mean, Tobolowsky could probably not be
Absolutely. Ned Gunderson from Groundhog Day is a sexy lamp.
Possibly. But...
women love that shit.
But most of the
other... A troubling scene.
Try being nice to your wife.
Yeah.
When he says... Are you close to your wife? Like, I kind of lost my shit because, and I don't know if maybe the state of relationships has kind of changed in the past. I don't think you could ask someone that now. You kind of just assume that people are close to their spouses. Like, what's your relationship like with your wife? Are you close to her? Anyway, I did want to ask you, like, how did you feel about Louise shooting Harlan or whatever his name is?
Well, yeah, I found it completely justified. And it's obviously a huge sticking point. I know for a fact that they had to wave off a lot of test audiences' response to keep it in the film, but it is the inciting incident. So the great thing about it is that it was always going to be there. It was a pivotal point in the script. But in terms of my personal reaction to it, completely justified because I found it so harrowing and I found so much of the film harrowing. Particularly how detailed it was, how it was shot, and the fact that it was in broad daylight. Not broad daylight, but it was in public. Like, it was at night, but it's in a car park at a fucking bar.
Crowded car park.
Yeah.
Like anyone else could have come out.
And you just...
Brazen is what it is.
Yeah, and you just know that it's... That has come from someone's personal experience and how you could watch this and not realise that and still criticise it is... gut-wrenching to me. So I like it. I don't like it, obviously, but I believed the scene. I believed her reaction. I felt it was justified because she's a human. It was like when she pulled the trigger, I'm like, yep, fair enough.
Okay, but let me ask you another question then. But like they had a choice here to do it as Louise shoots him like as he's attacking Thelma, or he could have attacked them again and she shoots him. And they chose to do it as Louise shoots him after he says, what does he say? He says,
suck my dick.
I should have fucked her anyway. And then he says, suck my dick. And I think he calls her a bitch.
Yeah, it's
so.
How can you not react at that point as a human?
Course.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. But like in terms of, the technicalities of the law, it's not self-defense. Once they're not attacked, it's not self-defense.
I understand.
Yes. I'm kind of wondering if you're like, it's obviously a deliberate choice to have done it that way.
Yeah. Well, you are correct in the sense that in the eyes of the law, it is not self-defense. But in the way that we've talked about this film, and I think the strength of it, including it in the film, is that the law must be questioned because it is flawed. This is the same law that wouldn't necessarily believe in either way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why, to me, it's complete catharsis.
And that observation and that detail of that observation is entirely missing on every negative review that I've read about this film.
Yeah.
Yeah, they breeze over it because they can't handle their own insecurity.
She wasn't even in danger. And it's like, he's a danger to women everywhere. Even if he was stopped.
Yeah, but he's already attacked her.
He hit her across the face.
It's truly harrowing. And the detail in which it is shot, I think it is... I think it's a great way that they've decided not to pull any punches in it and show the detail, but I found it very difficult to watch.
Yes, but it didn't feel super gratuitous to me, but it's scary. It's a scary scene.
Yeah.
I was scared for Thelma even knowing that it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Even knowing that Louise comes out, you still feel a palpable fear as it's happening. And that's a testament also to Geena Davis' performance. And also the performance of the guy, Slimebag. You did a great job as a Slimebag. Hope you love a Slimebag.
Really believable.
And when you're talking about like how they kind of almost liberated by this experience of what they're doing, and Thelma says something terrible happened, like it was terrible what happened, but you stopped something more terrible from happening. And my life is in a sense ruined now in the sense that we're on the run from the law. But if he had have been able to rape me and you hadn't stopped him, it would be more ruined than what it is now. Yeah. And that's a really like kind of poignant truth about the trauma of what sexual assault does to a person. Yeah. So I didn't have those lines verbatim, but that line of dialogue really stuck with me. And I think that's also kind of boils down to like what the film is about, is it's like, what is Thelma going to go back to? Essentially the same kind of experience from her awful husband for the rest of her life. Yeah. Or embrace this newfound freedom. But then I think we also need to then, and this is kind of going into our last kind of section about, I think, and in terms of like, is it Fight Club? We've already kind of gone over that about the backlash. Mm-hmm. Backlash on both sides, backlash from men and also backlash from a feminist perspective, which I understand but I don't agree with.
I don't think it Fight Clubs. I think there's enough there. There's people whinging to the same degree that a lot of people would whinge about stuff, but I don't think it Fight Clubs in the same way that Fight Clubs or Breaking Bad Fight Clubs.
Or the Godfather Fight Clubs.
Yeah. I think it's a no, but I would give it...
I would also say it's a pretty minority opinion.
Yeah.
The general opinion is, shut up.
It does Bechdel. So let's just... Bechdels, that's fine. That's totally fine.
I mean, also, but by the way, there are only 2 named women characters in it.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about the other men characters. I loved also the moment where the waitress is like, no, they couldn't have done this. And he's like, how do you know? It's like, well, she left me a really big tip.
Yeah.
It's like, I love that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does Bechdel. They do talk about stuff.
Shall we just identify Bechdel quickly in case anyone hasn't?
2 women. They have
according to the Feminist Film Guide.
2 named women characters. Tick. They have to have a conversation.
With each other.
Tick. And it has to not be about men. Tick.
And that happens several times. Even the map scene is a Bechdel moment. So that happens several times, but it's also worth noting that the Bechdel test is an incredibly low bar. So I think the fact that it passes it multiple times is a credit to the longevity of the film. So this is probably a resounding Bechdel passing. Like it is... to the point it happens so often that it's not even worth mentioning the Bechdel. So I would say it passes with flying colours, but your look on your face says otherwise.
It's more like, I think, for a movie about kind of women and feminine, it is still pretty overloaded with men and a lot of men worth analysing. And that's just kind of an unfortunate reality of like talking about feminism, is that there is a lot of talking about men because a lot of it is about what men do. My kind of thing for Bechdel is I love it more when there's just more women in it rather than that the women talk. But it's great either way.
Yeah.
It's great either way. And you had that scene in the bathroom and that felt very real. And I was like, well, there's lots of women there, so there you go.
Women.
I think
nightclub, bathroom.
I think the biggest kind of contentious is...
Do they make it?
Our final criteria, do they make it? So it's very hard for me to endorse, I suppose, an ending in which 2 women commit suicide as a kind of liberating moment.
I do too. And that's why I found it so difficult because, again, like they are... what I was banging on about, they are the complete victims of the oppressive world that they live in.
I will say, in the context of the film, and as we've already been talking about, like, when it comes to the option, like, what are their options, like, going back to their normal lives full of oppression into the carceral system in which they will be hard done by, totally oppressed. Escape is not an option at that point, so we're going over the cliff.
Yeah.
And in the context of the film, it's like, it makes sense. And again, also, it's fiction. What we can enjoy in fiction is not something... If I heard of a story of 2 women who had this story and they went over a cliff, that would just be tragedy, full stop. I wouldn't be, endorsing it as some kind of feminist moment. But this is a movie. explicitly trying to explore these ideas and also just represent a kind of truth of like what their options are. I guess they do make it. Because it's also...
I think in a spiritual sense
in a spiritual sense, they 100% do, you know, and they have their... Again, like kind of like the shooting, it's a catharsis, it's a release. They're free now. These men can't control them anymore. And also, there's a sense of autonomy about it. It's like...
They had their own free will.
They still decide. They decide together.
In a frankly very beautiful moment.
The last sort of 10, 15 minutes of this movie is just kind of exhilarating. Like then when they having that chase from the police, and for a moment it's kind of like, yeah, they did it, and then and then they've got, you know, backs to the wall, backs to the canyon. Yeah, I was like welling up when Thelma's like, let's not get caught.
Yeah.
I was like, and that's how it, and I guess that's how you have to approach it. It's not them choosing to die, it's them choosing not to get caught.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, it comes into the weakness if I don't really like this whole fucking Harvey Keitel chasing after. I think that we don't need that there. That's not the focus
I've forgotten
of the
that
scene.
it happened, and I probably will continue to forget that
because it's all about them and them deciding, we got in this together, we've come this far together, we've been free together, I'm not going to go back to them separating us and us being oppressed again.
Yeah. I think if that gets made again, Harvey Keitel doesn't chase after them. He has this like sort of harrowing thing where he's just like, he like lets them go, and like I think there'd be so much power in that because he understands the world for what it is and blah 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 whatever. Hopefully he would be a bit more developed. You wouldn't have the scene where he goes over to the house, but it's neither here nor there because it's not his story. Like we can pick that apart. Like, well, for me, in a spiritual sense, they do make it because I agree with all those points that you've made. But like the thing that sort of cut through to me is that like they don't make it, and that's what's really fucking sad. Like they get pushed to this brink where it's like,
and I guess
it's all that they can do to escape the oppression that they have, and like the fact that that is a reality. Obviously, this is a heightened reality within the world of, you know, this cinematic universe. Like that's fucked. It's so fucked that is the only option that they have, and it cut me so deep.
It's also like, even if they get to Mexico, what changes in Mexico? They're still in danger in Mexico. It's not like Mexico's some...
It is a MacGuffin. It's a complete MacGuffin.
Exactly. So I kind of think, well, you know, like the cover of the Feminist Film Guide is the car, and the screen, it doesn't end with the car in the canyon. It doesn't end with... It's a very
quick crossfade.
It's the car in the air. And that's, you know, again, we're talking cinematic language here.
Yeah.
They're flying, they're free, they're escaping.
Yeah.
They're escaping the only way they can, which is unfortunately through not living. And again, it's a poor reflection of society that you could kind of make this movie now with the same ending and it would still make the same kind of sense to a lot of women watching it. Again.
Is that because the harsh reality is not much has changed?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or perhaps nothing has changed.
The harsh reality is there's no escape to Mexico. There's no... And even if you get to Mexico, the same fucking shit is in Mexico. Mexico has an incredible femicide problem. So, you know, like, I guess that's just my point. Like, I guess what I'm coming down on is they do make it. It's just they live in a fucked world and making it is a fucked choice.
Yeah. Well, I'll be devil's advocate and say that they don't make it. But I guess if we're rattling it all up, it's 5 points out of 6. It is a pass mark. But... I'd say the mark is irrelevant compared to the legacy of the film and the impact that it has, and the fact that we can still talk about it nearly fucking 32 years later.
My sister and some friends of ours.
Friends of the podcast.
Friends of the podcast.
Well, that wraps up another episode of A Bechdel Dysfunction, a podcast that dissects feminist films directed by men and discusses whether they are helpful or harmful. Tune in next time for another installment. Thanks so much.